What's up guys, it's Twice here and I have yet another deck profile for you. This is one of my favorite decks, I would have to say. It's from set 13, and I gotta say that when I first saw that this clan was getting its support, I was like, looks kinda weird, and then I started playing with it a little bit on Cardfight Area, and I really enjoyed it. So I immediately, put my stake in. I said, I want this clan, and the team agreed, so this is, of course, my Nubatama deck. Alright, so let's just get right into it. This is our starter, Stealth Beast Kuroko. Now, Nubatama has very limited support. It has 4 cards from set 1, and maybe like 11 from set 13, so it's a very small clan, the smallest that there is right now. At least, the smallest serious clan that there is right now. Stranger. Anyway, so Kuroko is like the best starter for Nubatama. It's a foreigner. Its ability is that when an attack hits a Vanguard during a battle that it boosts, if you have a Nubatama Vanguard, then you can Soul Blast 1 and look at your opponent's bind zone and choose 2 cards from their bind zone and put them into their drop zone. So Nubatama is now fully based around like binding your opponent's cards, whether it be from their hand or their field, to prevent guarding, to retire units in Kuroko's case. Really, it's to give you an advantage and prevent them from guarding your onslaught, essentially. So Kuroko is an amazing starter, especially since he doesn't have to boost a Vanguard. Some people have run multiples of him. Frankly, I think that just takes up deck space. He's a really good benefit, though I don't think I would want to take out other cards in this deck to add another Kuroko. Still a really awesome starter. Anyway, so as for the triggers, the reason that Nubatama is, in my opinion, not as versatile or maybe as competitive as some people would like it to be is because it doesn't have any options and triggers. We literally have to run 4 crits, so no, secondary crit to run 8. Then we have to run 4 draws, which, I don't know, I think it's a cute little draw trigger. Then 4 stands, and of course your always obligatory 4 heals. 4 of each kind of trigger. We have to run Rainbow because that's the only kinds of triggers that Nubatama has. It's kind of unfortunate, however it's not all bad. Those stand triggers can come in handy sometimes, although I would personally like to run crits. There are times when I have won a couple of games because I got a stand trigger. And getting off another attack is always good. That 10k guard is nice. It replaces the 10k guard that you would have with the critical trigger. And the great thing about our stand trigger is that it can go in the soul, so paying costs like, Kuroko, or just anything else in this deck that's Soul Blast is a lot easier. So the trigger lineup is, of course, Rainbow. It's not exactly that specialized or versatile, but I think it's still rather competitive. It still works with the deck. Anyway, so we're going to move on to our grade 1s now. And there are a couple things I need to point out, especially with the first card, and that is Tempest Stealth Rogue Fuuki. Now at regionals, this was kind of a very controversial card because his not flavor text, but his description says that if your opponent has 3 or less cards in their hand, you can counterblast 1, put him into the soul, and then your opponent binds 1 card from their hand face down and then gets it back at the end of the turn. That's usually how bound cards work. The thing is, though, that on the website it says 3 or more cards in hand, and so the official ruling now is that it is 3 or more cards in hand. So this card is actually going to be reprinted, I don't have any of the newer ones right now, to say 3 or more. And for a couple of reasons. First of all, your opponent is probably always going to have more than 3 cards in their hand. Because after their turn, when they get Twin Drive and a draw, they're going to have at least 3 in their hand. And usually they might have at least 1 extra one. So if Fuuki only worked for 3 or less cards, he would be useless most of the time. However, when he was useful, he would be broken because then your opponent would only have 2 cards in hand to guard with. And if you use the boss card's ability, Kabukicongo, you get rid of any intercepts that they have. So immediately they're done. They can't really guard most, or any of your attacks. So it makes more sense to be able to use Fuuki more often, and so that he's not nearly as broken to say 3 or more cards in hand to use the ability. Moving on though, I'd say that the next grade 1 is easily one of the best in the deck. He adds the real pressure, and that is a card from set 1, Stealth Dragon Dreadmaster. So Dreadmaster's ability is when an attack hits during a battle that he boosts, so it doesn't have to be a Vanguard, it can be a rear guard or anything, which is why he's a really good pressure card. You can counterblast 1, and if you have less cards in your hand than your opponent discards a card. Discards one. They don't bind it, they don't get it back. So immediately, this is a really good pressure card. He's a 7k booster, which is really nice, consistent power. You can hit anything you want and get the ability off, and Counterblast 1, that's a pretty low cost. Everything in this deck is usually just Counterblast 1. It's not a very Counterblast heavy deck. So Dreadmaster is what gives this deck a lot of its pressure, and people are afraid of this card because they don't want to have to discard cards in their hand that they would otherwise like to keep. So running 4 of them is really just for the sake of consistency. You want to get that pressure. This card works behind any column. He's a really good overall booster. And then for other grade 1s, I run 3 AK Vanillas because we have very limited support in Nubatama. AK Vanillas are there. They're strong. And this deck is, again, a pressure deck. It hits for big numbers. There's some really nice numbers you can hit with these cards, especially the boss card. And so using the AK Vanillas just helps with the rear guards. It helps, boost your Vanguard, especially early game, which can help. And, riding an 8k Vanilla is always nice, too, just in case your opponent, for whatever reason, has to ride a 7k and they have to put down another card. Just 8k Vanillas are still very nice, and thankfully we have a good excuse to use them in this deck. Anyway, so for the next grade 1s, we of course run 4 Perfect Guards, or at least I will run 4 Perfect Guards as soon as I can find 2 more freaking Mijingakures. I've looked everywhere for these things. They don't have them at our store. I didn't find any on eBay. I've asked people on the Facebook page. Nobody has this card, at least, from what I've looked for. I haven't been to a tournament in a while, so I haven't been able to trade. But for right now, I just have to proxy these 2 little things. The Counterblast 1 gets plus 1000 power card. But it will be 4 Perfect Guards, which everyone always should run, especially since, big meta, Chaos Breaker numbers hit high. 4 Perfect Guards. Always got to have your 4 Perfect Guards. Anyway, so that's our grade 1 lineup. As for the grade 2s, I actually really like the new Nubatama grade 2s. I think they're honestly just really fun. And that being, the first one is Stealth Beast Tamagane. So this bear with a, I don't know what kind of claw thing, whatever that he has, he's a really good card just on pretty much any turn. His ability is that when he's placed on the Vanguard or Rear Guard, so this is a really good grade 2 ride, you can bind one of your opponent's Rear Guards, and then they're going to get that back to their hand at the end of the turn. But again, this card can combo really nicely with Kuroko because you can bind one of your opponent's valuable Rear Guards and then put pressure on them to guard, because if Kuroko boosts this card or any other card's attack that hits, you could very well retire that very useful unit that they had on the field. So this is Nubatama's kind of way of using a retiring skill, and Tamagane helps you pick off key rear guards, especially early game, or when you're sitting on your break ride and you're not able to use the boss card's limit break. So Tamagane, really useful card. I like to run 4 just because he is a 9k. He does work Vanguard or Rear Guard, so he's useful at any point in the game. And, binding an Interceptor, that might just be the thing that prevents your opponent from being able to guard that turn. So yeah, definitely a really helpful card. Alright, on to the next grade 2. I think this is probably one of the most threatening cards in the game, and that is Stealth Dragon Kokujyo. So Kokujyo's ability is that during your turn, whenever one of your opponent's units, or cards in general, is bound, he gets 2000 power. Okay? So, if you were to use the boss card's limit break and bind their whole field, if they had a full field, this card gets 10,000 power. So, immediately we have a really heavy swinger. One that gets pretty easy power because it's not hard to bind things in this deck. He can combo well with Tamagane or Fuuki if your opponent has 3 or more cards in hand, or with the boss card, or even with the break ride. So, because Kokujyo can work so well with a lot of the utility cards in this deck, most of the cards actually, it means that he will consistently be boosting for at least, 2,000 to get to 11k. So he can hit Vanguards on his own, he can get massive power, especially on the break ride turn, and then just really pressure your opponent and hit for some big numbers. Kokujyo is a really strong grade 2 that I think running 4 of them helps give you that consistent power. And then for the last, I run 3 of the 10k Vanillas, Stealth Rogue of 1000 Blades, Oburo Zakura, some very long names in Nubatama. We have an excuse to run 10ks, I like 10ks, good grade 2 ride, whatever, power, all that stuff. Anyway, so that is our grade 2 lineup, and on to the grade 3s. So I would say that Nubatama has one of the coolest break rides in the game, and that is Shura Stealth Dragon Kujikiricongo. So Kujikiricongo's break ride skill is that when a Nubatama rides this unit, you don't have to pay any counterblast or anything to activate this. Your opponent has to discard one card from their hand and then bind another card face down. So immediately your opponent loses out on 2 cards from their hand. So if your opponent has, let's say, 6 cards in hand when you do the break ride, now they're down to 4. Use Fuuki's ability, now they're down to 3. You could maybe do that again, and now they're down to 2. So obviously, this is where Nubatama becomes really strong, because in addition to giving 10,000 power to your Vanguard, you're making it even harder for your opponent to guard. In my opinion, this is almost like a Dimension Police-ish kind of strategy, because instead of reducing our opponent's power and forcing them to guard more, we give them less to guard with in the first place. So Kujikiricongo is a really strong break ride. His secondary ability is kind of hard to use, yet it's when your opponent has 4 or less cards in hand, he gets 2,000 power. So in early game, not really all that helpful, or at least mid game, and then into late game, if you're still sitting on him, you may get that +2. It doesn't really come all that often, but the break ride is a really good combo, especially with the boss card of this deck. Shura Stealth Dragon Kabukicongo, who binds all the things. This is one of the most annoying cards in the deck, if not the most annoying. His limit break is Counterblast 1, so you can immediately imagine that this is a really nice consistent ability. When he attacks, you pay the cost, and you bind all of your opponent's rear guards face up. So this is a really good combo with Kokujyo, because again, if they have a full field, then you bind 5 of their units, you give Kokujyo 10,000 freaking power. And the best part is that he also gets 10,000 power if there are 3 or more cards in your opponent's bind zone. So on the break ride turn, this card can by itself swing for 31,000. By itself. And I've got 8k vanillas in this deck, I've got really nice 7k boosters. You combo this card with Dreadmaster, you are putting huge pressure on your opponent. I would say that that is the keyword for this deck, pressure. You prevent your opponent from getting intercepts with the boss card, you force guard out of their hand, and because of cards like, Kuroko or Kokujyo, Tamagane, just really every card in this deck, you are putting consistent pressure on your opponent to either guard or take hits. And that's really why I like Nubatama, because it is a very offensive deck. And the artwork on all these cards is pretty cool. So anyway, that's my Nubatama deck. I hope you guys really like it. I really enjoy this deck. I just wish I had those other 2 freaking perfect cards. And, that's our video. So, have a great day. Keep card fighting. Thanks for all the support that you guys have given us so far. So, thanks again, and goodbye.